This is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at wvu.edu.
Sonesta Suites in Charleston, an extended stay hotel located near the airport, downtown, and the state capitol. More at sonesta.com.
Solar Holler, supporting Appalachian communities and building on West Virginia's history of powering the nation by bringing solar energy and battery backup to homeowners, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. More at solarholler.com.
Welcome to the Legislature Today. I'm Curtis Tate. Today is Day 50 and Crossover Day. This is the final day for both chambers to finalize their own bills and get them across the Capitol. While a lot of bills have moved already, the House of Delegates and the Senate each spent a lot of time on their own bills. A bill to establish a forest carbon registry was defeated in the Senate. Emily Rice has more.
Senate Bill 730 would have established a forest carbon registry under the state's administration of the Division of Forestry. Senator Eric Tarr, a Republican from Putnam County, sponsored Senate Bill 730 and introduced it on the floor, saying the creation of the registry was requested by the, quote, timberers of West Virginia. Tarr argued the registry would protect buyers from unknowingly purchasing encumbered land.
This has come out of the Green New Deal type of stuff that is coming across America, where people buy carbon credits, and in this specific instance, venture capital groups. And the land that gets tied up within West Virginia against being able to go in and timber that land for having bought it ends up in agreements that lock land up for our timber industry for about sometimes up to 99 years. And then somebody can go in, would they sell that property, that contract remains with it, but however, when you go to purchase the deed or buy the land, you may not know that that's tied up for 99 years and not be able to timber it.
Senator Tom Willis, a Republican from Berkeley County, spoke against the bill, arguing it would burden landowners, raise taxes, and reduce property values.
There's a reason the Farm Bureau is opposed to this bill, because it's an assault on landowners' rights. It's an assault on privacy of contracts. It's an assault on business rights. It grows government. It raises taxes. Let the record show this bill proposed by the senior senator from the 4th raises taxes. So if anybody in here has taken an oath not to raise taxes, this bill raises taxes. Farmers are business owners as well.
Willis and Tarr debated the bill at length on the Senate floor.
The Forestry Division shall establish reasonable fees. So would you like to correct yourself again?
There are not fees built into this bill, but they can establish fees.
Would you agree that fees are akin to taxes?
I would agree that fees are akin to taxes.
So your bill is raising taxes on West Virginians.
It has the potential to, but if they find that there's no administrative cost to administer this, then there's no fees necessary.
What do you think the likelihood, in honesty, is that they will find no administrative cost?
The bill was rejected with 16 votes in favor and 18 against. For the Legislature Today, I'm Emily Rice in Charleston.
In other business on the Senate floor, Senate Bill 89 would allow the creation of alternative public charter schools for high-risk students, including those who are habitually truant, recovering dropouts, or have been expelled. Senator Craig Hart, a Republican from Mingo County, objected to the inclusion of foster children in the bill's definition of high-risk students. But Senate Education Chair Amy Grady, a Republican from Mason County, clarified that high-risk students would not automatically be transferred to such schools. She said it's a step toward the type of alternative education settings the state needs to serve students falling through the cracks.
We heard from a group that has a lot of these types of schools across the United States. They're performing really well. Their goal is to, quote unquote, kind of rehabilitate these kids, to give them the resources they need, to show them how to deal with things that they need to, and to transition them back into a traditional public school. And I think this is a good start to seeing if we can have some of these that work.
The bill was approved by the Senate and now heads to the House of Delegates. Senators also approved Senate Bill 569, which would expand contractual protections for purchasers of new homes. Several senators stood in support of the bill, but Senator Eric Tarr, a Republican from Putnam County, stood in opposition, claiming the bill would create more unnecessary bureaucracy for the state's small business owners. The bill now heads to the House of Delegates on a 30-4 vote. The House discussed a list of bills, including a bill that would exempt the legislature from the Freedom of Information Act. Brianna Heaney has more.
A controversial bill that some say reduces transparency in government was considered today as well. The bill affects people like me, journalists, as well as researchers and members of the public who want access to information. House Bill 3412 would give the House the ability to exempt itself from the Freedom of Information Act requests, or FOIA requests. Anyone can file a FOIA request. It's usually done by filling out a form asking for specific information. If that FOIA request is denied or not complied with, individuals can go to court to challenge the agency's decision. The bill's counsel said emails would be an example of a possible exempted information. Emails, for example, can give insight on how the legislative process unfolds, or how lobbyists or special interest groups affect the legislative process. Delegate Clay Riley, a Republican from Harrison County, said the bill would clarify the parameters for FOIA requests.
The purpose of the bill is to clarify parameters and process for which the public sees and accesses public records. That's the problem we're trying to solve, to give clarity for the public so they know what they're requesting.
Speaker of the House, Delegate Roger Hanshaw, a Republican from Clay County, said the bill is to clear up confusion about what does and what doesn't fall under the Freedom of Information Act. He's the lead sponsor of the bill, which came out of the Rules Committee, which he chairs.
One of the objectives sought to be achieved by this particular piece of legislation is the clarification of what is and is not a legislative record that can actually be reachable by those who simply seek access to legislative records. Our current statute doesn't do it. It doesn't differentiate in any way between the legislature, the executive branch, and the courts. And one way we can do that is if we write a procedure that is specific to the legislature, that does make it clear to the public that here's what is and what is not a public record. By basically applying the way our current statute is enforced and is applied, just with greater clarity for the public.
Hanshaw said under current law, the policies around the Freedom of Information Act are better tailored for the executive branch.
The intention is not that we exempt the legislature from access to public records. It's just simply to point out that we're not the executive branch, and the kinds of records kept in the transaction of legislative business are really not akin to the same kind of records kept by executive branch agencies.
Hanshaw said that the bill is not intended to reduce transparency, especially with the media.
We think we have a pretty constructive relationship with our media partners right now, and I actually do use that term partners because we do rely upon those members of the credentialed press and the credentialed media to distribute those positions of the 134 individual members and of the bodies collectively.
However, the bill would give the current House Speaker or future House Speakers greater control over FOIA policies and will give the public and members of the media less insight into how those rules are drafted. Delegate Larry Kump, a Republican from Berkeley County, spoke out against the bill.
As if this bill is passed and the legislature is allowed to procure their own rules on Freedom of Information Act, perhaps the best way I can say it is, I do not like this bill. I do not like it. I do not like it at all. Foxes should not be guarding the hen house. I think this bill should fall.
Fluharty, in speaking against the bill, read the beginning of the FOIA statute that was enacted in 1966.
The people, in delegating authority, do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments of government they have created. Sounds like a campaign speech that I guarantee all of you would say. And you're going to vote against it today? Kidding me? Transparency in government?
Currently, if the legislature wanted to change FOIA policies, they would have to do so in the multi-step committee process, where stakeholders are granted a chance to weigh in on bills. If this bill passes, that would no longer be the case. Under this bill, the leadership within the House and the Rules Committee would decide in closed-door meetings what information is exempt from FOIA requests.
Look, I don't know what we're planning to do here, but using the whole just trust us model to the public is not one I like to follow. Just trust us. We're going to put it in rules, and we'll do the right thing.
Those rules would still have to be voted on by the full House. The bill will not change any current rules, policies, or practices in the public's ability to file FOIA requests. It now heads to the Senate for consideration. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Brianna Heaney at the Capitol.
Following up on Governor Patrick Morrisey's order, a bill to codify the elimination of certain diversity, equity, and inclusion programs has passed the Senate and is now in the House Education Committee. As Randy Yohe shows us, while Senate Bill 474 pinpoints the executive branch and schools, some state entities receiving state funding are still wondering where they fit in.
At the main branch of the Campbell County Public Library System, Executive Director Brianna Bowen says state funding covers as much as 20% of the system's income for the year. Bowen isn't sure of the full DEI implications on the library. Now, Senate Bill 474 calls for the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs from the executive branch, from primary and secondary schools, and state institutions of higher education. Morrisey's DEI executive order says entities receiving state funding, like the library, must eliminate preferential treatment of any race, color, sex, ethnicity, or national origin over another. Bowen says she'll navigate the situation as best she can to comply.
We want to do what we can do to meet those expectations, but also be there for our community and uphold the values and principles that we have always, been a part of and upheld, which is supporting everyone from all walks of life.
Bowen says policies and programs here at the library aren't really specific, but wide open when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion for all.
Right now, we don't have any policies that deal specifically with naming DEI, but we do have, we uphold the freedom to read and the Library Bill of Rights, which tell us that everyone is welcome in the public library, that we represent a collection, that we have a collection that represents everyone, and, we are the public library, and the public library is for the public, and it's for people, and it's for all people.
Bowen knows the library will have to comply with certain things, but she says
we'll continue serving everyone. We'll continue being there for our public and just still representing all backgrounds and people as best as we can.
For the Legislature Today, I'm Randy Yohe in Huntington.
Several cities across West Virginia have implemented camping bans designed to prevent homeless people from sleeping on park benches, in doorways, and other public spaces. A statewide ban is making its way through the legislature. Maria Young sat down with someone very familiar with the state's unhoused population to get her reaction to House Bill 2382 and what it might mean.
One of the bills making its way through the West Virginia legislature in the final days now of the 2025 session would make it illegal to camp on public property. Now, this is not referring to people who are camping per se in state parks, but to the unhoused population who is sleeping on public property, which would include things like courthouses or on city park benches. House Bill 2382 would make that illegal, and it's been referred now to rules. So for the moment, it's parked there and may or may not come up again during this particular legislative session. But that bill does reflect a growing frustration that some are feeling across West Virginia about this state's unhoused population. We did ask a number of the sponsors of this legislation to join us for this discussion, but as this very busy session winds down in these final days, they all declined to do that. And so today we are turning to someone who is very familiar with our state's homeless population and the challenges that they present. Margaret O'Neill is the president of the United Way of Central West Virginia. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me, Maria. Appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. Now, what is your, just off the bat, what is your take on this legislation? I know you've been following it. Is this a good thing, a bad thing? In between?
It's an in-between thing, and I certainly feel the frustration that people feel because we see that at our office, right? We have similar situations where we find people sleeping or resting on our property, and sometimes a mess is made and trash occurs and all the things. But as a provider or someone who's worked in community services for many, many years, I just don't necessarily believe this is the solution. We are happy that they are offering, if you are approached in the first time, that people are offering shelter beds or recovery opportunities. But, as you and I have discussed, that's a challenge in itself on where to refer people. And if it's the appropriate place for somebody in a mental health crisis or someone who just may not be in a place in their life where they can be in a shelter.
Let's right off the bat get some numbers. Our most recent point in time count was just a few months ago. Do you know the numbers that showed in terms of the overall homeless population in West Virginia?
So I think in the state, the point in time count came in 2024, just over 1,600 people. And here in Charleston, we average right around 300, give or take 10 or so, based on situations. COVID made it different, a few things like that. But what's important, I think, for people to understand that does include every single person in shelter. So if it's here in Charleston, that's including our men's shelter, our family and women's shelter, our domestic violence shelter. And so, as well as those who aren't housed or aren't sheltered are counted to the best of our abilities. So, where would another 150 people potentially go in Charleston if they wanted to be housed?
Well, and let's talk a little bit about going beyond the parameters of Charleston, because I think Charleston and other metropolitan areas have more resources here. There are folks who are couch surfing, and also folks who have run out of couches to surf on. If those beds in those shelters are full, if we go beyond the parameters of Charleston, say more rural populations, McDowell County, do we have a shelter desert in this state?
We absolutely do, and I think multiple counties are shelter deserts. And I was blessed to work in the United Way of Southern West Virginia before I came to Charleston. McDowell County was one of our counties, Wyoming, Summers. Raleigh County, Beckley has the only shelter in that whole part of the southern part of West Virginia, including down into that Logan Mingo community. Here in Charleston, we have shelter. Huntington is in all kinds of strife right now about what's going to happen with sheltering in that community. Morgantown recently experienced a challenge with their homeless shelter and had to be stood up and reopened by another organization. So this is an issue that we all are challenged with every day. But if I'm someone living in a very rural part of West Virginia, and for whatever reason I'm now without a place to sleep, there is very little option for them other than to travel an hour and a half or 2 hours in several directions before they would find a safe shelter.
Well, and you say travel an hour and a half to 2 hours.
And
you
how?
mean by
How do I get there?
Right,
Exactly.
You're not talking about walking.
No, of course.
You're talking about public transportation.
Access is a huge problem. And
Sure.
so how would we get them? And do we have providers in those communities that would have a car and be able to drive you to a shelter if you wanted to go? So there's extenuating circumstances almost on a case-by-case basis.
You mentioned Huntington, and of course they have a low barrier shelter, and that's got its special challenges as well, because the low barrier shelter means that someone can show up who is currently under the influence of some sort of substance, whether it's alcohol or something else. They can show up in the midst of a mental health crisis. They could have an outstanding warrant for their arrest on charges, and no one's going to report that or address that issue. They're going to provide shelter. They're going to provide a place for them to sleep.
And if I could just to say, it's a place to sleep, but it's also that very first opportunity for us to extend what do you need and how can we help you. And so if it is a mental health crisis, that low barrier shelter should be equipped to have providers that are there to walk them or get them through the crisis. And maybe they do need hospitalization or some other type of referral. If it's somebody who needs recovery, the time to offer them is the next morning after they've had some safe sleep and some coffee and a donut or coffee and a piece of toast, and you can have that conversation. So we see it as an entry point. A low barrier shelter is a place where people can, without judgment, come and be safe for a night and then start the process of services if they're anywhere. So there are very few. It's a great buzzword, and we love to talk about it, and we'd love to see one in bigger communities, but there are very few opportunities to really be a low barrier shelter in West Virginia.
Well, you understand the resistance to that.
Oh,
because,
sure.
What business or what neighborhood wants that in their location?
Not in my backyard. We hear it every day, all the time. Yep, and I get it, right? I get it. As I said, our office is on a central corner in Charleston, and so we have guests often that come to charge their phone or find a place where they can rest a minute, and it can be super frustrating, but we prefer to talk to those folks individually and see how we can begin to case manage them to a place where they don't have to be outside and they don't have to sleep on a sidewalk or a park or a bench.
Well, and you said it earlier, I think a lot of folks who are not unhoused, who are looking at this population and the frustrations that causes, and they might see being unhoused as a choice, that I would rather not go to a shelter because there are rules I don't want to obey. I'd rather not go to a shelter because, I might need to take medication I would prefer not to take, or I'm not ready to deal with my addiction issues, and, so I'd prefer to be able to do what I want to do. And so a lot of folks, I think, see that as a choice. And you said earlier, there's not many people who say, I really just want to wake up on a park bench.
I've not ever had a person tell me that. And my husband says, don't say it this way, but it's literally true. I've slept with hundreds of homeless people in my career in this work, and had those 2 o'clock in the morning conversations. Just about I would say 95 to 98% of the people we talk to are from here. When we're talking about a Charleston shelter, they can tell us where they grew up, and most of the time we'll offer their story and how they became to experience homelessness, and it was never a choice. It may have been something that happened to them, something that caused them to have trauma in their life. It could be a financial situation. And my pet peeve, and I get it, I get the frustration, but my pet peeve is, how do you know they're homeless? So how do you know if I'm not going to walk through a park with a backpack on, and that you determine by my look, because I look pretty bad on Saturday when I go to the grocery store, how are you going to determine that I'm homeless? And when people say to me, a homeless person stole my bicycle, I know thieves who live in houses. I know people in addiction who are in their home and choose that addiction. I know people who have chronic illnesses who choose to ignore their illness, and because they're in their own house can eat that sugar and the ice cream and the bread they're not supposed to eat. I think for me it's just dehumanizing to say those people, and how do you determine them? Because they're just as human as you and I. People are the same, and something caused them to go down a road that you and I, maybe by the grace of God, didn't choose. And so if we can have the conversations about what would be a safe place for you. Maybe you can't be in a 100-bed shelter because you're a veteran and PTSD is a real part of your struggle. I was happy to see the amendment on the bill that there is going to be some consideration for people experiencing homelessness that are veterans.
So that veterans don't end up being confined in a prison or a jail facility through this legislation, which is,
so that's a struggle. And so it's more, I think, for us that we would say, what is the place where you can be housed, right? Is it a place where you need wraparound services because you're not mentally in a place where you can pay your bills on time or you can take your medicine the way you're supposed to, and you need somebody as a case management piece, but we have that. It's just connecting the person to the services, and it takes a minute.
So United Way operates the 211 statewide phone number.
Yes.
What happens when you get a phone call? And all the shelters, and you and I talked over the winter, the shelters were full. There were some warming centers, but they were kind of popping up and then disappearing. And there were times when it was really cold and shelters were full. What happens when 211 gets a phone call and the shelters are full? What do you do?
We work really hard to find alternate solutions. And sometimes, I'm not lying, don't love it, has to find somebody to pay for it, but sometimes it's a hotel room. That would happen only if there are children involved usually. Mm-hmm. So if we get that 211 call and someone's car broke down, or they're living in their car and they couldn't keep it running for heat, and they were going to be outside with 3 degrees in a car with 2 kids, we're going to try to find a way to house them or shelter them, not house them, work on housing. And so sometimes this winter that was a hotel room, but it's really hard to find providers that can pay for that. United Way, for example, doesn't have money for hotel rooms. but sometimes we are able to find other folks who do have that ability, but it's really hard. And just because I knew I was going to be talking to you, I checked all the shelters about 10 o'clock, and everything in Charleston is full right now today. So if that happened, and I will offer, I find you outside in a park on a bench, and I say, Maria, how can I help you today? Would you go to shelter? And you say yes, we would put you on a waiting list for the women's shelter. And it may open in the morning, it may not open until Saturday.
But you're unhoused that night.
Yes, ma'am.
And for a lot of women, I would say that's a dangerous place to be.
It's extremely dangerous, and sadly, we do see more women experiencing homelessness than we have in the prior years, my prior years. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. We have, less women in the workforce right now than ever before post-COVID. Women are challenged to try to figure out how to take care of their families if they're single moms. We know that we have lots of single moms that are below the federal poverty line in West Virginia. And so it can happen. I guess that's my, what I would say to anybody, legislators, leaders, people who are looking at this problem, totally get the frustration, but we have to sit down and talk about what solutions are palatable to a community and how we can make this more of a human issue and not such a us against them issue.
So in the last 30 seconds or so here, if you were talking to lawmakers about this issue, and clearly they are experiencing and expressing some frustration with where things stand now, what would you say to them?
That community development leads to economic development. So there's not a provider in any community that doesn't want to work on this issue. We would just say work on it with us, work on it together. And I don't think we can legislate our way out of poverty and/or homelessness.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Greatly appreciate your expertise. And I'm sure that we are going to be following this issue throughout the rest of this session and then ongoing from there.
That was Margaret O'Neill, president of United Way of Central West Virginia, talking with Maria Young about a proposed statewide camping ban. That's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Catch the Legislature today, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. And remember, West Virginia Public Broadcasting covers the session daily in our radio news program, West Virginia Morning, and on our news site at wvpublic.org. I'm Curtis Tate. Good evening and see you here again tomorrow.
Support for the Legislature today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at wvu.edu.
Sonesta Suites in Charleston, an extended stay hotel located near the airport, downtown, and the state capitol. More at sonesta.com.
Solar Hauler, supporting Appalachian communities and building on West Virginia's history of powering the nation by bringing solar energy and battery backup to homeowners, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. More at solarhauler.com.